there's like a cool distinction you can make between deru soda and deru yoda, right? 今夜は霧が出るようだ. So generally, like a really easy way to think about it is that this one here is more like based on sort of your own perception, right? And this one is more based on heard information, right? Look at this table. It says soda, right? Soda. And then it says 情報取得地の状況, the situation you were in when you got the information. So here you have 直接的, which means direct. And then 関心の度合い, so amount of interest, huh? Okay. See, it's like there's so many different explanations because like all the two other explanations that we looked up didn't even mention this. But okay. And then we have Yoda. So Yoda is listed as 直接 and 間接的, which means direct and indirect. And then 監視ややor to, so kind of big to medium levels of interest, I guess. らしい。やや間接的, which means pretty indirect source of information. And then 関心中、やや小さい。medium or small levels of interest. Interesting. 皆さんはケーキが好きですか？それとも苦手ですか？では、目の前にあるケーキを見たとき、あなたはどう言うでしょうか？このケーキは美味しそうだ。このケーキは美味しいようだ。このケーキは美味しいらしい。Yeah, so if I just このケーキは美味しそうだ. I feel like the first one, right? The first one is definitely just me looking at a thing and judging it. Oh, well, it's a cake. It looks delicious. That's what comes to mind. We'll see if the explanation that I'm going to give here is going to line up with the explanation that they're going to give. When I hear このケーキ美味しいようだ, it seems kind of like more distant. It's like you're 美味しいようだ, like you're like, well, it seems kind of seems tasty, but it's almost like it feels like you're not making the judgment based on just the way it looks. And then このケーキは美味しいらしい. That almost seems like you've just been told it's delicious. It's like you're not really expressing your own feelings at the time. So let's say how they explain it. There's three different words, soda, yoda, and rashi. They're about getting information and then thinking about the information and then making a judgment and voicing that judgment. And then often people from abroad say that these are difficult to differentiate. So we're going to look at how they are differentiated. There's two things that matter essentially, which is the situation at the time when you got the information. So what situation were you in when you received the information? And the other thing that's important is your degree of concern, like how much you're kind of concerned about that information or the situation. So essentially they're saying, well, if you saw the cake, they're still talking about this cake, obviously. The cake is the example. If you were looking at the cake from a close distance, well, you would see its color, 色、形もよく見え, right? You were able to clearly see its color and shape. 匂いも嗅ぐことができますね. And you could even smell what it smells like. And then, depending on the situation, you might even be able to touch it. 振ることもできるかもしれません. Like you might even be able to give it a little boop, give it a little touchy touch, you know? Just put your finger right in there into that cake and then get thrown out of the store. That's how it goes. On the other hand, you might only have been looking at the cake in the showcase of the store. You might have seen it on TV or in a picture, or you might have heard about this cake from someone else. Either way, you were separated from it. So this is the distinction of 直接的, direct, and 間接的, indirect. 関心の度合い. So here's the degree of interest. All right, so now they're differentiating between, again, how much you're directly interested in it. Like your 関心の度合い, your degree of interest. So they're saying, well, maybe when you were getting the information about the cake, you were hungry, or you were like, you love cake, or you like sweet things. You wanted to eat the cake. Or, on the other hand, maybe you don't like sweet things, you don't like cake, or you're full, you're not hungry, so you don't want to eat the cake. So that's how we're going to differentiate. To understand the differentiation between those three words, soda, yoda, rashi, we need to think about the situation when you got the information, but also, again, how much it concerned you. And then they say, どちらかというと, if we had to pick, then we would say, 関心の度合いがより大きく影響すると思われます。と思われます is a way of saying, like, it is fair to say, or it can be said that it's like fair to believe that, right? It's a way for, you will see this a lot in articles, like net articles or whatever, when people talk about their opinions, but they are it's kind of saying like they consider this a fact. So it's like to omowaremasu, which means like, well, it can be thought that, sort of saying that this is how it's generally understood, right? This is what we think of common sense, right? So they're saying that your degree of interest is actually of greater importance than the situation when you heard the information. And they're saying, for example, you could have heard about the cake from a friend, but you don't want it at all. Or you got cake from a friend and you literally have it in your hand. So, you know, you could get cake from a friend literally into your hands, just directly there. So it's very direct, but you don't want to eat it. So that's direct, but you don't care. And then the other one is indirect. You hear about it, but you're drooling because you want to eat it so much. So it's indirect, but you care a lot, right? Here, they're comparing the three, right? This is the table we looked at first. It's that table of direct information versus indirect information, and caring a lot versus not caring that much. So we have this table. So here, the basic table they give is soda for when you have direct information and you care, which usually means you are interacting with the object, or you have like very much first-hand information. So you're looking at it, smelling it, touching it, whatever, and you care. Kansin dai, lots of you are interested. Yoda for it could be direct or indirect information. So, you know, could be something you've heard, could be just the situation kind of telling you that that's what's happening, or it could be direct and you're pretty interested and it's like pretty interesting to you and it's like medium. And then rashi is pretty removed, like it's probably not direct information. So either you've heard about it from someone or you're kind of have a vague idea about it, and the care for the situation for you is medium to low. I wanted to say something about this kanshin no doai. I think the reason also they mentioned this is because, like, when you use rashi, often it kind of sounds like you don't care that much. You know, rashi is kind of a thing you say when you're like, meh. You're like, yeah, I guess. You know, they say that's the case. They're like, kono keiki oishii rashii yo. There's like, meh, I've heard this cake's pretty good. It's like, it really doesn't sound like you care that much, you know? Nabe no naka o nozoku. Oishii ne. We have like scene instructions. That's good, right? So, alright, looks into the pot. Oishisou ne. Oishishou ne. Like, looks delicious. Do? Hashi de tsuki nagara, hoka no wa ii kedo, daikon wa mada katai you ne. Hashi de tsuki nagara. So, poking it with the chopsticks, he's like, hoka no wa ii kedo, daikon wa mada katai you ne. The other stuff seems fine, but the daikon seems to still be pretty hard. Daikon wa yawarakaku naru no ni jikan ga kakaru rashii kara. In conversation 1, right? Person B is looking at the pot directly. They can smell the hot water, they can smell everything, and they're saying oishisou da. Like, it looks delicious, right? It seems delicious because they have all this direct information. And then in B2, right? Because they looked at the color of the daikon and they poked it with the chopsticks. They thought it was kind of hard. So she said, or they said, I think it's a she, right? Yeah. So she said, katai you da. Seems still hard. So the explanation they're using here for why use yoda and not soda is because the feeling of that she wants to eat it was kind of overwhelmed by the fact that she only had indirect information about the daikon, which means that, like, she didn't know for a fact, right? She didn't have any direct information about the state of the daikon because she couldn't touch it directly, but she could look at the color of it, and she was touching it with the chopsticks. So she's saying, well, from everything that I know, it seems like it's still hard. So that's why it's like less direct than if she was able to, let's say, cut it open and touch it with her hands, I guess. So it's like, it's not the most direct thing. So that's why they're saying like, well, she was using yoda. These are not usually like hard rules for like, oh, you can only use this or you can only use that. It's just that depending on the kind of feeling you want to convey. This is something that is always important to keep in mind, is that at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, it's not about really like what are all the sort of empirical rules for what I should say. It's more about what is the feeling you want to convey. That's something you need to keep in mind when you think about things such as choice of word or phrasing, things like that. It's usually grammar is a part of it. But when you're reading a book and the author is using a word, oftentimes the reason is greatly influenced just by the emotion that or the feeling or the concept that the author wants to convey. It's like they may use a word not because it's grammatically accurate or only because it's grammatically appropriate or whatever. It might also just be because that felt like the right word to use. And it's the same with these kinds of things. Maybe if she wanted to convey more certainty about it, she could have said katasoda. Like she could have said like, it seems it's still hard, to sort of be more like, well, not even like certain about it, but to just like give a different feeling. I guess it's like a slight change in certainty. That's what I feel like. The soda versus yoda. It sounds like a little bit more like you feel like that's what it is. But yeah. Okay, so then the explanation for the last phrase here. 大根は柔らかくなるのに時間がかかるらしいから. So apparently it takes a while for daikon to cook to be soft, is what she's saying. And the explanation they're giving is because B just said that it's still hard, A wants to sort of console them, right? 慰めるような感じで、大根が煮えるまでに時間がかかることを人から聞いたように伝えています。So they're now relaying this information that they've heard from other people about how, well, it takes a long time to cook daikon. They're like, well, I've been told this and I kind of know this from other people. It's like, yeah, don't worry. It takes a long time to cook daikon until it's soft. They're also comparing it here to the soda you would use for direct hearsay. So the soda would be something like, yeah, 時間がかかるそうだ, which would be, I've heard that. And then the other one would be かかりそうだ, like it seems to be taking some time. That would be the difference for those. So they're saying that this らしい is actually very similar to the soda you have for hearsay. Here's another conversation. たくさんの人が並んでいるね。あ、3D 映画をやってるんだ。3D 映画は面白いそうだ。らしいよ。So here they're using the hearsay. When you read this, the feeling you should immediately get is like, oh, this person is not speaking from personal experience. Right? That's the feeling I get when I hear this. 3D 映画は面白いそうだ。面白いらしいよ。When you hear this, it's like, oh, this person is just relaying what they've heard. Like, this person is relaying other people's experiences, but not their own. Because, well, if it was their own experience, if they knew, right? Because if they knew it was fun, they would phrase it differently. They would say something like, 面白いよ. Because then it would be like, well, I think it's interesting, so I'm relaying this directly. Like, they are interesting. If the person would have said, 3D 映画は面白そうだ, then it would seem more like, that seems more like they're excited about it, personally. 面白そうだ. Like, oh, that seems fun. So it's more like they, and this actually, that's like an interesting example because when I say this, what I feel is when someone says 面白そうだ, it sounds like they're excited about it. But you don't necessarily, do you need like direct information to be excited about it? I don't know. It's kind of, that's a weird, isn't that kind of a weird example to consider? Let's think about like 3D 映画面白そうだ. Because that seems like you've kind of observed the information and you're interested, you want to check it out. Maybe it's that 関心の度合い that they talk about, like the amount of interest you have. Because when I hear 面白そうだ, it seems like you're very interested. So the 関心の度合い, I guess that's what they said about how the amount of interest is really what influences it more. So when you say そうだ, it really sounds like you're super interested. You're like, well, that seems really interesting, like to you personally, right? It's this sort of like I said, it's this subjective feeling kind of thing. そうらしいね. And then yeah, they're just confirm. But here they're just here they're using hearsay. They're saying 面白いそうだらしいよ, which is very sort of it's more like other people have said that it's interesting, which is like I've heard it's fun. Is essentially what they're saying. They're like, I've heard that's pretty fun. You know, I was told it's pretty fun. And then the other person is そうらしいよ, which is saying like, oh yeah, I've heard the same thing. It's essentially what they're saying. All right, so here's an example with verbs. Because here they're saying we've been using adjectives, so now let's use a verb. 空を見上げて、雨が降りそうですね。午後から降るようですよ。天気予報でそう言ってましたか？午後から天気が崩れるらしいです。Okay, so here we have kind of like going down the tree of directness, I guess. This is exactly the same example I gave with 霧が出る, which is like you look at the sky and you're like, well, it's about to rain. Because you're directly observing something and you're making a judgment based on just the information you're directly getting right now, right? You're just saying like, you're looking up at the sky and like, well, it seems like it's going to rain. And then the other person is saying, 午後から降るようですよ. Which means, yeah, apparently it's going to rain from the afternoon. or it's this like in between thing between apparently and I think that. It's kind of, I guess you could say, I think it's gonna rain in the afternoon. And then person A is saying again, 天気予報でそう言ってましたか? Did they say that on the weather report? And then person B is, 午後から天気が崩れるらしいです. Which is, yeah, they said that in the afternoon the weather will deteriorate. So the big difference is that for like soda, let's do like the easy one, right? We have 食べる, we're gonna use おいしい. So for so, if we wanted to say so, right? And the so meaning seems like, I'm making the judgment that, personally I feel that, right? I'm making a judgment. So for soda, right? If we wanted soda, which is 食べsoda, we just use the stem. For this type of soda seems, we would use the stem form, and it's the must stem usually. 聞きそう, 食べそう, 読みそう, yeah, whatever, right? Soda. By the way, a common version of a common, probably the combination here is also the potential form. So for example, 食べれそうだ, which is 食べれる or 食べられる, right? 食べられそうだ. 食べられそう would be a common one, because you're making a judgment about your own abilities at that point. So when someone asks you like 全部食べられる? You're like 食べられそうだ. It's kind of like, can you eat all of this? And you're saying, I think I can eat all of this. Like that, so you're making a judgment, you're making a, it seems like, state about your own abilities is very common. Yomeそうだ. Like, I think I can read this, right? That's pretty common. Those forms are pretty common, I would say. For adjectives, for e-adjectives, it would just be, we've seen it a few times in the article, おいし stem form, right? おいしそうだ. Like that. おいしそうだ seems delicious. So you just get rid of the last e, right? For the e adjective. That's the stem. And then for nouns, そうだ with seems is actually not used with nouns at all. So you would have to use のようだ to say it's like. For non-adjectives, it's just the word and then soda, right? So 静かそうだ, which is seems quiet. So then for yo, it's very similar, just that for the verb, right? You have, well, it's similar but different. You don't use the stem, you just use the normal form. So for 食べる, it becomes 食べるよ. 食べるよ, right? You just add it to its normal form. You can add it to negatives. 食べないようだ, right? You can say that too. For おいしい, it's just おいしいようだ, right? It's just full normal form. ようだ. So you can also, sometimes you can leave out the da, but we're just going to leave it in for now. Just, I mean, it makes it consistent. おいしいようだ. And then for nouns, you always have to put the のようだ. And for na adjectives, you have the na. 静かなようだ. You have なようだ, right? For na adjectives. And then for らしい is just basically the same as yo in this case. So 食べるらしい. So it's literally, it works the same way as yo. Except for non-adjectives, I guess, and nouns. So 食べる would be the same. 食べるらしい. Like this. But then for e-adjectives, it's also the same. It's just adding it to it. おいしいらしい, right? おいしいらしい. That's how you would phrase that. But then for nouns, it's just 犬らしい, which is like a dog. I feel like for nouns, these words are almost a little bit different. But yeah, I guess you could say seems like a dog. 犬らしい. Yeah, I guess seems like. It still works. 犬らしい. So no. And for non-adjectives, also no na. Not 静かならしい. It's 静からしい, right? Just no and no na. That's the difference for this one. And then I will mention one more where you have one more thing, which is mitai. You may have seen. So mitai is basically just a more spoken version of Yoda, as far as I think. You can basically plug in mitai whenever it's Yoda. It's kind of the same thing. You know it from the famous song, Baka mitai, いい加減待っててもバカみたい. Mitai is basically Yoda, but it's a bit more of spoken language rather than written language, though you can find it in both. Mitai itself, the way you would use it is a lot more, I guess, like rashi, because you would say 食べるみたい It seems like eating, seems like eat. It's kind of, I feel like often, maybe it's just a feeling I get. Taberu, it seems like more like you would use it with teiru, I guess. Tabeteru mitai, which is like, oh, it seems like they're eating, but they're not, maybe. So when you're like making comparisons, but you're saying like, that's what it seems like, but it's not really that. Tabeteru mitai. It's like, oh, it's like they're eating, but they're not. That's kind of what that feels like to me when you're saying something like that. And then for e adjectives, oishii mitai. Seems delicious. Shizuka mitai, so no, na again. And for things again, no, so inu mitai, like a dog, right? So the way it attaches to words is actually more like rashi, but its meaning I think is a little bit more like yo. So there you go. All right, thanks YouTube. Okay, I will see you around. Peace. I'm out.